Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Coach Gerald Lami podcast. I will be bringing you content with some of the best sport personalities around the world and sharing a journey with listeners and inspire the next generation. Without further ado, I would like to introduce my special guest for today, Tom Pell. Welcome, Tom. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
No problem. Thanks very much for having me.
Anytime. So I just want the listeners to kind of understand where you've come from and your upbringing.
So I've been involved in academy football pretty much all my life since the age of 8. I was involved with Peterborough United as a kid all the way from 8 to 16. Before then, not gaining a scholarship, going on to Cambridge with playing and then starting coaching. And I've been at Cambridge in the academy now as a full-time coach for just coming up to short of 14 years. So, yeah, that's my very quick journey, mate, in a bit of a nutshell. Yeah, that's me.
No, brilliant. So in terms of your upbringing, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Lincolnshire. So I grew up in a village called Ruskington, real sort of small, well, I'll say a small village. It's a big village, but in a small area, if that makes sense. So it's quite interesting, really, because in a silly way, we used to play football, like every kid did, play football on the streets, down the park and what have you. But I think in the two closest streets to my house or our house, there was 6 lads at professional clubs. So there was a couple of boys at Nottingham Forest, a couple of boys at Peterborough, a couple of boys at Lincoln City. So it was like real easy to just make friends. And I mean, it's just find a ball, get a ball, and just sort of create a really nice environment. So when I look back at my childhood, I have really fond memories of, just playing football all day, every day. You know what it's like. You get home from school, you play football, your mum calls you in for tea, you go back in for tea, you come back out, play football, then it gets dark, she calls you back in and you sort of do the same thing the next day. So that was me as a real young one, before then going on to Peterborough at 8 years old. And then it was training 3-4 times a week, various different types of training for a very long period of time. Peterborough was about an hour for me, for my parents to drive.
Okay.
So it's quite a commitment for them, 4 times a week and what have you, for 8 years. So yeah, that's me.
Wow, amazing. So what drew you into football? What was your inspiration that drew you into football?
Cool. I'm not sure how to answer that, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not. I don't come from a football family. My dad was a rugby guy. Used to watch rugby a lot as a kid. My brother wasn't really into football that much. I guess it was just something that I grasped, and I quite enjoyed playing with myself as well. I could quite easily go out the front for hours and just do keepy ups and try skills and things like that. I'm actually an Everton fan.
Okay.
Even though it's nowhere near Lincoln where I grew up. There was a family from Liverpool came and moved to the area, moved to the street when I was real young, and sort of just said, "Do you want to come to a game?" So I went to a game when I was about 6, I think I was, maybe a bit younger than that. First ever game at Everton, and that was me ever since. So that sort of maybe got me into it a little bit more and got me appetite for it a bit more. And then, like I say, there's so many kids around the street playing football. I guess you were probably the minority if you didn't play. And then I've always been quite a competitive person. So when you're playing up against bigger, older, stronger boys, it gets that bit of fire in your belly and gets you going. So yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I'm not sure probably where it's come from. It's definitely not family, but yeah, just loved it ever since I was a little one, mate. Really.
No, amazing. So you said you had a family that moved in from Liverpool. Just paint a picture for us in terms of the environment. Was there much of a multicultural in your surroundings, or was it just a certain geographically people there?
Yeah, no. So it lacked a lot of diversity. So very much white British area. We had my parents sort of had some really close friends. There's an Asian couple that moved to the area. There was quite a large RAF base about 3 or 4 miles away, where quite a few families would then come and sort of join the village, if that makes sense, as part of the RAF, which added a little bit of diversity to it. But my close friends and family and what have you, where I grew up, were very much similar to myself. Came from uh, a white British background, and that was pretty much it. Really, it wasn't until obviously I became a bit older, or until I went to Peterborough, where I then started to have more friends of a more diverse culture, and
Mm,
different backgrounds and different upbringings and things like that. So I actually look back at that as really as fond memories as well, because I think had I have stayed in the same area for the same sort of like for all my life, I probably would have missed out on a little bit of that. So I class myself as fortunate there as well.
And I think that's the beauty of football, really, is just in terms of having different cultures, different ethnicities, and just bringing everyone together. Personally, and I'm sure a lot of people can agree. I'm sure you can agree as well. That's the beauty and the power of it as well. As till today, I've still got a lot of friends that I've met maybe 10 years ago through football that I still speak to today. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah,
maybe I would have never got in contact with them or had an interaction with them if it wasn't for football. So I think that's the beauty of it, in terms of just meeting new people and things like that. So you said you spent your most of your career, your young career or academy career in Peterborough. What
that's
was that journey like to go through? Getting scouted for Peterborough and then going through the system.
Yeah, it all happened very quickly for me as a real young one. So, like a lot of kids, probably went to like an after school club at their school. I remember it was a guy called Russell Warby, who ran a curver coaching company in
Okay,
and
yeah.
around Lincolnshire. And obviously, at that time, I'm talking, God, 20, 25 years ago now.
Wow.
He was running it in the area. I went to it, and then after a couple of sessions, he just sort of said to my mum and dad, "Oh, we have like a development centre in Boston. Would he like to come?" As he's obviously done quite well. So I think that was after a couple of after school sessions. So I did that. And then after a few sessions, I didn't actually realise. So it was almost um, like a curver development centre, if you like, for probably slightly more uh, advanced players at that moment in time. And like I say, I didn't realise, but it was actually part of Peterborough's development centre. So I
Okay.
went for one session. They sort of said, "Oh yeah, you've done really well. Would you like to come and play a game for?" I guess it was like their under 8, 9 team at the time in Peterborough. Did that, played one game, and then literally after that, that was it. I remember um, my mum getting really panicky about a couple of things because it was a bit of a journey for her. She'd gone from sort of taking me to school to, to a week later taking me to Boston, which is probably 20, 30 minutes from their house, to then a
Mm.
week later taking me to Peterborough. And then within a couple of weeks, they said, "Oh, we've got a tour coming up to Wales." So I went there, and I remember us sitting at the back of the as I sat at the back of the minibus, sort of being the being the mum that's sort of going, "Has he got his belt on?" and all that sort of stuff. And then before you know
As
it,
they do,
yeah,
as mums do.
exactly. A month later, I went to Sweden to the RS Cup for a week, and I was
Oh wow,
8 years
okay.
old. My mum's still got little cuttings out the back of the local paper and all that sort of stuff saying, "Oh, Thomas 8 goes international." And it literally, probably I would say 3 weeks before I went to my first after school club. So it was all a bit crazy,
Mm,
really. But yeah, really interesting. I'm sure obviously there's lots of people that got different stories how they got into academy football, but I would only speak highly of it. Like you said, that you meet so many more different people. You have so many
hmm
experiences. Like I say, going to Wales and Sweden as an 8-year-old, some young lad from Lincolnshire, was a fantastic experience for me. Having only
hmm
been in academy football for probably a month or 6 weeks. Um,
mm,
and then I went on to go on to so many tours around Europe and what have you. So I can only speak positively about it from both a football perspective, but a social one as well.
hmm No, for sure, I agree with you. So your playing career, how did that end?
Well, I could be like a lot of people and say, "Oh, it was because of this and it was because of that." So
Yeah.
um, I didn't get offered a scholarship at Peterborough. So once I I left Peterborough. I went to Cambridge City. Um,
Mhm.
I was offered a couple of scholarships a bit closer to home, but for some reason, I don't really know why, I was keen on moving out. So I wanted to sort
Mhm.
of move away from home, um, I guess, and just try and grow up a little bit and get away from
Mhm.
where I grew up and see and meet different people and gain different experiences. So I joined Cambridge City. I was there for 3 years. And then the sort of the youth program at Cambridge City then went to Cambridge United. I went there for a year and then didn't get any contract or anything like that. So then after that, I just sort of ended up playing non-league football for a while with the likes of Grantham Town and teams like that.
Mhm.
And then, to be totally honest, I at that time when you drop out of football full time, I just really enjoyed coaching. So the more serious I got with my coaching, probably the less serious I got with my football. So in the end, I mean, it did come down to injury, but that's definitely not why I didn't make it. That was just why I didn't continue a non-league career.
Mhm.
But to be quite honest, it was probably coming to a time where having to coach on a most weekday evenings and a Saturday morning and a Sunday, I probably didn't have time to play as it was. So that's my very small average playing career in a very short description.
No, but I'm sure you've taken a lot of what you've experienced through your playing career to your coaching. So, in terms of your coaching, how was that transition into from playing to coaching?
Yeah, it's interesting your point about that when you're playing going into coaching. I mean, I was fortunate enough to work with some fantastic um, coaches as a player or as an academy player. So the likes of Dan Ashworth, who went on to be
Mhm.
technical director at the FA, is now at Brighton. He was my under 14s, 15s coach. Brilliant coach. John Morlin, who's now academy manager at Brighton.
Mhm.
So many coaches. Kit Carson, who's obviously renowned within youth football in the UK, as producing a lot of players before he sadly passed away too long ago, and other names like that. So I was really fortunate in those respects, and I think when you're a player like every ex-player of whatever level and every age that they've played, they've probably picked up a few little things here and there. The one thing that I was really fond of from Dan Ashworth was his sort of post-match um, reflective practice. So he was really
Mhm.
keen on making sure you reflected on your game. You wrote down your reflective practice. You discussed it individually. You discussed it as a group, and I felt that that made for a really sort of open environment where
Mhm.
you know what kids are like at 14, 15. If you say one wrong thing, it can quite easily be jumped on, if you like, if you haven't got the right culture. And he created a culture where you could speak quite freely in front of your teammates and say that you did this well, but you didn't do that so well, or you felt that your teammate did something well, but didn't do something so well. So that's something that I've really tried to take into my coaching career, if you like, or now as an academy manager, where you're trying to create a team of people that the environment is one that they feel at ease to express themselves, because like we all do, you can pick up the phone to somebody, you can have a 2 minute or a 2 hour conversation with someone, you can always pick things up and you can
Mhm.
always learn. So that was something that I tried to take into my coaching career, and something that I still try and use as often as possible today.
Mhm. Mhm. No, interesting. So, where did it all start for you? Your coaching
Yeah,
career.
so whilst I was at Cambridge City, I was quite keen on getting involved. A, because it gave you a bit of extra money on top of what you was already earning, which most lads at that age are always keen to do, whether it be for petrol in your car or new trainers or whatever it might
Yeah.
be. Um, so that's how I started with after school, dinner time clubs, breakfast clubs, things like that. Then it went on to taking some development centres. And then I sort of I got the taste of it a little bit. So I actually opened my own franchise, or started my own franchise, football coaching, similar sort of thing in schools and what have you. Before then, probably about 6 months later, being offered a job at Cambridge United full time, to come in and sort of take the younger age groups. I used to take the pre-academy or elite, as it was called then, and the under nines, as well as run a development centre program for them. So that was my the early part of my coaching career. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, amazing. So, in terms of your coaching journey at the beginning, was there any tough, difficult times that you encountered?
Um, yeah, I guess so. I mean, I always remember doing my UEFA B really young, and I
Mm,
sort of felt that I was out of my depth. It was very much speaking around 11v11 and stop, stand still, and when he's in this position, you should be in this position. And although I'd played football at a fairly okay level and been involved in football all my life, so I thought I was sort of quite clued into tactical information and what have you. I found that really tough because when I worked with players, it was all about them enjoying themselves and having the freedom to be able to play and be creative and score goals and stop goals and do tricks and skills and things like that. So I was really, I remember sort of being fairly nervous starting it. And then after 2 or 3 days, if I'm being really honest, I didn't enjoy it because I felt
mm-hmm,
like, oh, is this to get up the coaching ladder? Is this how you have to coach? Whereas naturally over time you understand that how people interpret different things and how people coach and put their own spin on things is obviously for everybody to do. But I was probably
mm-hmm,
19 at the time and early into my coaching career, and that was sort of quite a daunting time, if I'm being honest. Yeah, I was very uncomfortable with sort of the way it was led, and would probably say that was the furthest out of my comfort zone I've probably ever been on a coaching pitch. So yeah, but all good learning curves, of course.
mm-hmm, hmm. No, for sure. You touched on just the different ways to coach and things like that. How important is it for players to get different coaching styles and different coaching techniques?
Yeah, I mean, I one thing that we try and create at my club at the moment is we try and one of our objectives is to try and create the most diverse games program possible.
Mm-hmm,
Um, and similarly with coaching, because you know as just as well as I do that there'll be players that have come through the system and are now professional footballers or aren't professional footballers, and just their journey itself through having different coaching techniques and different coaching styles and learning styles. They might have a coach that's a teacher, they might have a coach that's a part-time taxi driver, all this different type of diversity in terms of their learning. Yes, there are downfalls to it and it won't all be positive, but there will be lots of positives. And one of the key things in order to be a footballer is to be resilient. So even if
mm-hmm,
it's a case where there's a player that doesn't particularly get on well with a coach as an under 12, as an under 13, as an under 15, whatever it might be, that might be the case when they're older and they are a professional footballer. So, as cheesy as it sounds, I think every experience is a learning experience, whether it's a positive one, it makes you happy, it makes you a bit less confident, or whatever it might be. I'm a huge believer in the most or the more diverse your upbringing as a player in terms of
mm-hmm,
what you learn, who you learn from, where you learn it, how you learn it, is really, really key because at any point in football, you can be taken out your comfort zone. So if
mm-hmm,
you're able to have the fallback and the experiences, regardless of your age, of how to deal with those problems. Whether it be a coach is giving you information and you don't quite understand it, or whether it's you're working with a player and sorry, you're a player and you're trying to sort of play with somebody else that you don't quite feel in sync with. You've got to find some mechanisms that can get the best out of yourself. So um, that's why I believe, well, for lots of reasons, but there are a couple of the reasons why I think a coach has, a player, in order for them to go through, I would be a big advocate of making sure that they have the most diverse program possible. Of course, that's
mm-hmm.
easier for some clubs than it is for others. But if you can try and incorporate that in your program, I would definitely sit here and say that would be something that I would definitely promote. Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I've obviously been in around your environment that you've created around your club, and I can 100% say that, just in terms of the players and just the whole environment itself, it is very family like. So a lot of players feel comfortable and they feel a bit more open to speak to the coaches that I've just been around anyway. Um, but no, it's interesting that you say that in terms of developing for the players. But in terms of yourself, like, how do you develop yourself? Is there any ways? Is there any coaches that you look up to, or is there any that courses that you get onto, or just reading anything that you do?
Do you know what? That's actually something that I'm really poor at. I need to be better at reading. Honestly,
Okay.
I do. I'm trying my best to read more articles and more
Hmm.
books and bits and pieces like that. Actually, a bit of my goal of mine at the moment is to do that while we've got a little bit more time where we're perhaps not travelling to and from work and bits and pieces like that. But um,
Hmm.
I think from a coaching perspective, one thing that you have to do, and one thing that naturally I think everybody learns more over time, is you have to understand yourself before you can start determining what type of coach you want to be. So, if I understand what my qualities are as a coach and what my downfalls are, if you like, or what I'm not so good at, I
Hmm.
think naturally that gives you a good base to work on. Okay, I need to work on X or I need to work on Y, but I know I'm good at such and such. Something that I'm fortunate enough to be part of is the Elite Academy Managers Program, which is run by the Premier League. And one of the early parts to that is to get a 360 feedback from different stakeholders across your club about you as a person, you as a coach, you as a leader, you as a manager, so many different things. And naturally, when you look back through that and you can see people's either individual opinions or their perception of you, or what my perception is of what they think of me, if that makes sense. Sometimes that
Hmm.
can be exactly what you think. I think that they think I'm X, Y, and Z, and they do. And sometimes you can be really surprised. Um, but I'm just trying to go back to your question from a coach's point of view. I think if you're a coach and you understand what you're good at and you understand what you're not so good at, I think that's a real good start. And I know it sounds really, really basic, but I think
Hmm.
quite a few people can get carried away in. Um, there's so many platforms now where you can pinch sessions, or you can um, listen to podcasts, or you can listen to this or watch this on YouTube, and they want to be like other people. So Pep Guardiola plays in this way. I want to be able to do that. Or Mourinho plays in this low block. I want to get my team to do that. I think
Hmm.
you've got to be your own person. Yes, you need to take qualities from other people, and yes, you need to make sure that you have this mindset where you're able to grow as a coach and as a person. Um,
Hmm.
but I think first and foremost, you really have to get to know your own qualities. How you decide to do that, whether that's through self reflection, whether that's through getting other people to almost give you feedback, is entirely up to you. Um, from my point of view as a coach, I would like to say I think I know some of my strengths and some of my weaknesses. Um, and then naturally, over time, I think going back to self reflection, if you can give yourself time to do that, as well as obviously having an environment where you can speak to your other coaches to get honest feedback. Obviously, I'm an academy manager, so naturally, if I was to ask people for feedback, some of my staff might be reluctant to be really honest because they're thinking, oh, well, so you've got to try and create this environment whereby if I said to our lead PDP coach or our head of coaching or our foundation phase lead, oh, I've just done this session or I've been a coach in this game, can you give me some feedback? They'd be open and honest enough to say, actually, I think when you stepped in and intervened there, you're probably in for too long. You needed to get in and get out. Or it might be that the way that you spoke to the group there was fantastic, but blah, blah, blah. So it's quite a difficult one to answer, I think. But like I say, without sort of banging on the drum too much, I think to know yourself is really, really important. I think if you've got good people around you, you can always seek honest feedback. And then also your self-reflection is really key because ultimately you only you know where you want to get to. So if you're happy working part-time as an age group coach, taking an under 12 team, and that's what you want to become the best at, then that's absolutely fine. You know where you want to get to, you know the level of what you need to get to, so you've got a goal that you can work towards. If you're not quite sure, again, no problem. But if you're not quite sure, maybe you need to be that bit more open to feedback, because naturally you're not quite sure what you're pitching it for, if that makes sense. So it's a very
No, for sure.
difficult question, I think, personally, because everybody's different. It's only my opinion.
Mm,
Some people will say, "Yeah, right, I want to. This is what I want to do. This is the type of coach that I want to be. This is the type of manager that I want to be." But I think over time, as football evolves, as it does all the time, you have to become adaptable and you have to take feedback on from other people, because when we first got to know each other, however long that was ago, 4, 5, 6 years ago, how much has football changed since then? So what's not to say in the next 5 years it's going to change again? So being able to um, learn all the time and be able to adapt and progress, I think, is really important.
no, for sure. I think it's important also to create an environment, that sort of culture around you, where, because I'm sure there's a lot of coaches, and even speaking for myself at the beginning when I did start coaching, I was a bit hesitant to kind of get feedback at first, because I knew personally I wasn't at the level where I wanted to be. So at that time, I felt like I was being criticized, but at the same time, like I was just saying, I think it's important to create an environment and culture around you also, and be open to the criticism which you mentioned. But in terms of like your environment and your coaching staff, what sort of things do you look for in a coach?
Oh, good question. Well, this sounds a bit probably the wrong way around, but one thing you have to obviously have now, they need to be qualified. So through EPPP regulations, for us to be able to offer somebody a lead professional development phase coach, for example, the first thing that they would have to be is qualified. So A license and bits and pieces like that. For the younger ages, B license. So as harsh as that sounds, because I know there are some very, very good coaches out there and some people that work with children that are absolutely amazing that potentially don't have those qualifications yet. But the position that we're in, obviously, we have to do that. And again, as cheesy as it sounds, there's a bit of a saying that we have is in terms of if you can get the right people on the bus, once they're on the bus, you try and find the right seat for them. So there'll be some people that are absolutely brilliant characters and brilliant coaches or practitioners, whatever we want to call it, that think, yeah, do you know what? I'm going to be the best under 18 coach there is going. But actually, their skill set might be more conducive to an under 14, 15 group. So I think if you can um, recruit the right type of person who has the right characteristics, who has the right personality, who has this willingness to learn and to develop, as well as being their own man and their own person and wanting to be strong about their own beliefs, then naturally, um, once you've got enough of those types of people in the room, and if the environment is open enough to say, okay, I think your qualities are this, and I think this is the areas that you need to improve, and that includes myself, then naturally, I think everybody finds what's right for everybody else. Um, so it's really hard to put that into words to say, oh, this is what we do. Obviously, when you advertise for any job, you'd have a job description and you would have certain qualities and certain competencies and responsibilities that people would just simply have to be able to do. Um, but we're always, I got some feedback not too long ago because we've had quite a big turnover in staff at our academy in the last 12 to 18 months to say that even from a candidate that wasn't successful, around how thorough our interview process was,
Mm-hmm.
because it's about trying to get the right person rather than the right sort of qualification, if that makes sense. We've got lots of coaches that have got UEFA A's and UEFA B's and things like that, and that's not to put them down because you have to work really hard to get them. But I think finding the right person is really key. So having a thorough interview process, or whether you want to call it an interview or introduction or induction or whatever it might be called for your particular club, I think is really key. And that's been something that, to be totally honest, has probably been my main focus in the last 12 to 18 months, simply because we have had a big turnover in staff. And I think when you're almost rebuilding something, I'd rather take longer to get where we want to get to with the right people and the right philosophy and the right culture that, well, to use the word that you used, than okay, we need an under 16 coach, right? Let's just get him in and get somebody in as quickly as we can, to make sure that you take your time with it. But at the same time, I appreciate not everybody's got that time, not everybody's got that resource. So depending on your own situation, um, would depend on how that works for you. But that's worked for us quite well over the last, like I say, 12 to 18 months.
Mm. No, that's interesting. So, if in terms of coaches that are new to the game or would like to get into coaching, what sort of advice would you give to them?
Um, Sorry, just say that again. So new coaches coming into the game.
To the game, yeah. What sort of advice would you give to them?
Um, Probably, I would say make sure you put the player first.
Mm-hmm.
I think about all the best coaches that I've seen or worked with or things like that. And actually, if you're talking about technical competence in terms of like a coaching manual and this is what you need to do and this is what your sessions need to look like, probably the people that like sort of I picture in my head aren't those people. They're the people that actually the kids love, whether they're 12, 8, 16, whatever, they have this feeling towards them. And again, a bit of a cheesy saying, but things that you would have read and seen before around um, in 5, 10, 15 years' time, people won't remember what you say to them, but they will remember how you made them feel. And that's
Yeah.
sort of something that we try and obviously ask the coaches to have. So I know probably 10 years ago, maybe when the FA brought out the Youth Awards, I think the module one was to the environment and the player and getting to know the player and things like that. And I'm a huge believer in that. So yes, you need to be technically, tactically good, if you like. You need to have enough knowledge to be able to impart that into the children. But at the same time, I wouldn't get too wrapped up in that. I would make sure that you've got a good enough baseline of knowledge which you can give to the players, but make the players love the game. Because if you make the players love the game, they will love you. We will have had players sign for our football club over the last 10, 15 years, rather than sign for another football club, probably because they have an affinity to that coach or to that club because of the way that they've made them feel. Um, we would have had players that could have signed for Championship, Premier League clubs when we were in the conference. So why on earth would they sign for us when their first team's in the conference and they could sign for a Premier League club? Well, probably because that coach made them feel so good about themselves, made them feel uh, so confident, so comfortable, that they didn't want to leave that person. So that's it's not easy, and I think it's a skill within itself. But to get kids to love coming to your sessions, especially for people that are just starting within their coaching journey, would be the biggest bit of advice that I could give.
Mhm. No, amazing. You touched on the social aspect of coaching. I'm a big believer of that also in terms of getting to know the players themselves, and just getting to know what sort of character that you're dealing with. Do you think that that sort of mentality is changing within the game where coaches are doing a bit more the social corner of coaching than a couple of years ago?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I think there's a huge swing in ensuring that players are socially adaptable and socially involved, and that the four corner model, making sure that the social is just as prominent as the physical, as the technical, as the tactical, etc. Obviously, lots of professional clubs in the UK at the moment will have either somebody designated to player care or a full time member of staff or several full time members of staff around player care to ensure that, because of all that comes around uh, the football pitch, if you like, off the pitch, on the pitch, everything that goes on in people's lives, to ensure that that player is developing socially is just as important as it is technically. Um, because it's a very volatile environment, football, at many different levels. the good and the bad, and how people can adapt and how people can interact with other people is so important, not both just on the pitch, but off the pitch as well. So something that we try and, again, another objective at our club is to try and provide a certain amount of life skills seminars throughout the season, so that we can try and improve them socially. That might be from equality, diversity, and inclusion within our younger players, all the way through to our older players, or it might be something as simple as information around nutrition. It might be something around social interaction with adults, with coaches. We're not saying that we're experts at it. It's something that we're trying to improve, but certainly something that we see the importance of. And again, you would know as well as I do, for lots of players that that have progressed and made it through into the game, so many of them will say, yeah, I wasn't the most talented, but I worked the hardest, or I did this, or I did that. And I think the social aspect of football is bigger now than what it's ever been. Naturally, because there's more staff involved and because there's more provision for the players, you can help them with that, with the volume of staff that's there to support them. But with social media and all the things that children have these days that perhaps we didn't have, or I certainly didn't have when I was a young kid, it makes it that bit more important. So I would stand here and say that I think there's been some real good strides in that, in academy football in the UK over the last few years, and I could probably say quite confidently I could see that getting stronger even over the coming years.
No, interesting, Tom. I just want to thank you, mate. Thank you for your feedback and just your journey, sharing it with the listeners. I can honestly say you're doing great work. Being around an environment that you created around your club, it's definitely an eye opener and something that I look up to quite a lot. So I appreciate your time again. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
And I wish you all the best, mate, with everything that you're doing.
Great. Thanks. And to you. Stay safe.